Do you like goons? You know, like vintage mobster type goons. The generic type of bad guy that says, "Okay boss," while working for a comic book villain. Now that Fallen Aces is out, goons are finally back in style. The last time I was talking about Fallen Aces, I was playing the demo and I mentioned that this term is actually a huge part of their marketing campaign. It's so over the top and obviously tongue-in-cheek, but I think we can all appreciate them reviving the old definition of the term for a little bit of humor. Mostly everyone gets this joke, but I did get one comment from some very angry dude that I was using the word goon in the video. Seems like a really strange term to get upset about, but I guess that guy just isn't cut out for the goon life. You might think all this doesn't really tell you much about Fallen Aces itself, but they aren't just joking around for the heck of it. The game heavily plays into classic comic book tropes, from grizzled detectives to costume vigilantes, and yes, a ton of goons for you to beat up in all manner of ways. Right off the bat, there's a lot to love in the art style alone. The cutscenes really nail the retro comic style, even featuring that signature halftone filter we all know and love. And the in-game graphics maintain this style pretty effectively, especially considering it's a mashup of both 2D and 3D graphics. The enemies, items, and most interactable objects are 2D sprites, while the level geometry, floors, walls, buildings, and the like are all 3D. And while we already know what these comics look like in 2D, it's definitely a challenge transferring a comparable art style over to 3D assets. But the devs did a great job here, making everything look pretty cohesive and rather unique despite the mixed media. Likewise, the levels themselves are pretty large for an indie game, offering up some pretty nice views and giving a great sense of scale to the world. This influences the game design as well, providing the player with tons of areas to explore and secrets to find off the beaten path. You can face enemies head-on, brawling your way to victory, or sneak by through a vent, on a roof, or even underwater. Given the wide breadth of options here, Fallen Aces actually feels a lot more similar to a typical immersive sim like Dishonored than the Doom clone it presents itself as. In many ways, I felt like the level design and scale was pretty close to Gloomwood, which makes a lot of sense because New Blood developed both of these games, although Gloomwood's being made by a separate team. Fallen Aces is definitely more combat oriented, but you can play it like a typical stealth sim, and that's completely valid too. They've even got one level where you have to infiltrate a mansion with a blackjack and not kill anyone, clearly calling back to the Thief series. Now the stealth is fine and all, but combat is definitely the most fleshed out part of the whole experience, so that's how I solve the most problems. You've got your typical punches, kicks, blocks, and other unarmed maneuvers, but then you've also got just about every grabbable object in the environment to expand on those basics. You can use an axe or a gun like you'd expect in any game, but could I interest you in a trash can? Or a chair? How about a bar of soap? Even items that can't go into your inventory can still be picked up to chuck at enemies, giving you a nice frantic, makeshift feeling to the combat. Likewise, you only have 3 item slots, and items break rather quickly, forcing you to constantly think on your feet. I know that item durability has been a hot topic ever since Breath of the Wild, but I think it actually works pretty well here. You're not supposed to get too attached to any single weapon, often shuffling through a handful of them in the course of one fight. You just make do with whatever you're holding and what's nearby. Or switch back to your fists, which are pretty good in their own right. That's all well and good, but I did feel that ammo and consumables taking up one of your 3 valuable slots felt a little strange. I totally understand the developers wanting you to make trade-offs between better weapons, more consumables, or whatever given the situation, but it leads to some less than ideal scenarios. Like picking up some ammo you expect to use later, only to never find the gun for that ammo, and then losing all of it when the level ends. Or leaving behind a medkit, taking a beating 10 minutes later, and then having to trek halfway across the level to heal up again. Or the fact that ammo and speed loaders take up separate slots, even if the ammo is the exact same type. You could be holding 1 pistol, 2 bullets, and a speed loader, and that would be your entire inventory. Likewise, the game has consumables like potions that give you armor or make you berserk briefly, but those also take up one of your slots. Which means that basically anytime I found a consumable, I would instantly use it, even if it provided almost no benefit, because I didn't want to waste a slot lugging it around. It's also weird how large and secret-filled some of these levels are when you can't even hold most of the rare items you come across in these secret areas. Like I said, I totally understand the 3-weapon limit and how it influences combat. I'm just a little more mixed on those ammo and consumables being in the same slots. There is some potential that the in-game currency would let you buy more slots later, which would be cool to see, but who knows. Personally, I think it would be nice to have 2 specialized slots, one that only holds ammo and one that only holds consumables. So you could decide between carrying a medkit, a berserk potion, or a sandwich without it feeling like a loss on the weapons front. Likewise, the other slot would have you decide between pistol ammo, shotgun ammo, spear gun rounds, or whatever else you might want to shoot. This would also make it easier to limit how many guns the player uses, since they are obviously the strongest of all the weapons. If you had one consumable slot and one ammo slot, you could even reduce the default weapon slots to 2 instead of 3, further incentivizing the makeshift combat. Make those 2 slots further expandable down the line with some upgrades, and everything could be feeling pretty nice. Of course, this isn't me telling the devs what to do or anything, it's just how I think about tackling the problem. I think more than anything, it's good to hear where players are feeling friction in your games, even if their ideas are often terrible. I think there's an old saying that goes, players are right about the problems, but wrong about the solutions. And that's something I think about often when I'm reading reviews on my own games. But enough game design talk, what else is going on in the current early access build? Well, the voice acting is pretty nice, featuring a handful of different actors pulling off some peak pulp noir characters.
So what, I get in there, beat some faces, save the day, and maybe get an oil change while I'm at it?
Something like that.
Everyone gave a solid performance, even down to the regular goons you spend the most time interacting with.
Get him! How about somebody?
Although I think my favorite of the bunch was the actor behind Glassjaw, because he really nailed that fine line between menacing and cheesy for a comic book villain.
Now keep your mouth shut if you know what's good for you, before I bite off the other 4.
And while we're talking about audio, the in-game music and sound design is pretty well done too. And even though the loading screen music is made up of public domain tracks, they make perfect sense alongside the rest of the game. Despite these tracks no longer being copyrighted, I'm not going to risk playing them in this video because I'll almost definitely get a content claim from some random channel abusing the system. But suffice to say, you've almost definitely heard some of this loading screen music before, and it fits in perfectly with the rest of the game. Overall, I was pleasantly surprised with the early access version of Fallen Aces. My biggest issue with the previous demo was the overall linearity of it, and they completely blew that out of the water. While the current version isn't too long, it also isn't very expensive either. Paying about $10 for a couple hours with a unique, entertaining game is completely worth it to me. And that's not even considering that the game is expected to be 3 times as long when it's finished in development. So would I recommend picking it up now, even in its incomplete state? For sure, and that's coming from somebody who doesn't buy many early access games in general. The current version feels like a complete game from a smaller studio, and I'm really excited to see where they take it next. So huge props to the New Blood team for finally releasing the game. I'm definitely going to check back on this one later down the line. And if you want to check out more stuff like this, there's a ton of similar indie games I've covered on my channel in the past. And if you've already played Fallen Aces, I'd love to hear your opinions on it in the comments below. But I've got a lot more games to check out, not to mention some top secret projects I've been working on, so I hope to see you all in the next one.